and that's with Bryan Orthel. Thank you so much for hanging in there for so many hours. Just briefly introduce you. This is a co-authored paper. You're also from the School of Art, Architecture, and Design, but you're Indiana University in the US. You're collaborating with from Washington State. And I think it's a very interesting take. We are going in this direction already from Wenlu's presentation, but I think you will. There's much more the social and dimension of the wicked and tame distinction. So please, the stage is yours, and I will mute us here so you understand.
All right. Good morning. Good afternoon. Across the day. As authored this piece with Julia. Julia is at another else, someplace in Germany. If she was this, but I'm fearing that she presentation. So, thank you. I'm here today. We're going to be talking about from Rittel and Weber's original framing of a wicked problem theory that had a component that social and systematic complexity, and thinking about how we then solve those problems. There's been a little bit of discussion about going right back to Richmond, but not a lot, and we want to talk a little bit further. That issues of inequity are inherent to the knowledge systems that we're using in solving problems, but we're off the results. All right. So Rittel and Weber, from the very beginning, we're talking about wicked problems, right? About social values, and it, and that often where the conflict arose, and noting how and substitute into solving the problem doesn't resolve the problem. So later, and pluralism that they recognize in Western society continue is obviously still not clearly the problem centers lie for many of the problems that we're asked to address, complexities of those systems. What's all not apparent is the where and the how intervene in those problems to solutions, problems and contain ideas that are about ethics and justice, such as what is the good solution, what are the consequences. We can be wrong, but apparently involves the inequities in design problems are evident, even in something as simple as the selection of a window, whether that window is operable, whether that window is automated, whether that how you can open and operate that window if you can with HVAC system, may be initially just understood as technical problems. The ethical issues about what decisions mean for human comfort, for human access, for human agency, are very real issues of justice as we understand it. And how we arrive at fairness shapes not only how we move forward to approach and solve problems. Western understanding of justice, we can look at virtue ethics. We can look at consequentialism. I can never say that. But today, as we're talking about with justice, is to look at ethics and a little bit ethics that inform how we might operate. So at the same time as Rittel and Weber about using social contract to define what we understand to be right, and his veil, the idea that we would design our ideal social contract without knowledge where we in the world, establishes an idea, but it's not one that is particularly critiqued because it's, of course, but it also is one to help us solve the types we're looking to solve. If we look at approach that's defined by Ben and Martha Nussbaum, they position the origin of justice within the capability of the negotiated worked from the capabilities approach as he originally outlined it. He was well prized for that. Key idea here, how resources are distributed, and specifically the idea that everyone should retain on their capabilities with the resources that they need. The sort of class this is to understand the distinct difference between fasting. In a fasting situation, I have the capability and the agency to make a decision about whether or not to eat. In eating, I again have the opportunity to be able to eat. But in starvation, is that I don't have a choice or the resources to be able to human potential. So as cross-cultural, Nussbaum specifically, as well as the cross-cultural globalist approach to ethics. These are ideas that should be available with the resources, but the time and place, and as long as we are never abandoning what human dignity and needs are. Senri list that every human should have. Nussbaum does provide a that has sort of been a years. These are ideas that would so issues such as just access to sensation and thought, emotion, practical reason, affiliation, harmony with others, ability to play for one's environment. A key point here is the idea that abilities are tied up and making a choice. The individual has the aid, but the individual choices also affect others. And so the actions of one may limit or hinder to maintain abilities. So what Julie and I did, map the original character Rittel and Weber, characteristics of just problem solving that emerge from the other people. And most important, as we think through all of these pieces, understand that we're as what is driving the decisions. To talk through examples. From a just let's look at problems we're dealing with. Of course, there's no definitive naming for them, nor and part of that is based in the fact experiences of the world so dramatically. The people who are working or experiencing the problems are going to experience them in different experienced injustice themselves of a way to understand what that injustice might be, right? We know that inherently our social and economic systems acculturate us to consider what types of suffering are acceptable. This is one. The image of a window may seem pretty separated from that, but here, only within the last year, to recognize, you will be able to towards the controlling that window shade are tied together, and recognized is not the right word. We have only formally acknowledged the inherent with that approach. A hindrance can become a hindrance and actually dangerous for children and other people. All decisions, incredibly small, but are also very meaningful. So the decisions that we're talking about, or the problems that we're talking about, of course, have these massive separating out how is related to where the energy source is, and the more complex environmental systems that energy is produced. And it's far beyond my decision to turn on decisions about somebody else and exist in a world thousands of miles away. Relationship with those things. As they, we is inherently incomplete, ethically, intentionally test whether seems well, and so we have human consequences of those, even when it's something as simple as understanding the parallel, since every attempt counts precisely because the contemporary have stronger human consequences been previously recognized. Again, in the United States recently about cameras and AI and features, etc. Not built into some of those conversations is the ways that those systems have systematic of color and how they recognize, for example, or black, or may not recognize a consistent way and additional structural inequality to be continued. We think is important as well. Obviously the solutions be readily listed, but for us, the ultimate test for any solution are its consequences for humanity. And of course, that may be consequences for an environmental system, an ecology, etc. The core piece is we're talking about its consequences. The uniqueness of wicked problem, inherently unique, plays out as it relates to how we understand our individual characters, the human relationships we have. Well, as a brother, as a father, as an uncle, etc., and all the play as part of who are. That also raises the complexity, right? When we're talking about justice, we may be dealing with justice for one aspect of someone's identity, as it relates to other aspects of their identity. And so understanding is often a challenge. Talking with my students, how they design for individuals who may have difference in how move through the space, that understanding those individuals are not defined characteristic. That is one that is not the only. We acknowledge that justice action, obviously that the consequences of justice are specifically for humanity. We have sort of looping back to the idea that that means that the problem, and we've heard that several times, we've talked, shapes the problem that we understand to approach solving it. And so how we understand is thermal comfort and the temperature is a socially constructed problem. And Julia involved with some of the work that's how the standard internal for spaces are based on some very exclusionary, don't include wide swath, and understanding how viewpoint influences and informs all sorts of other decisions related to HVAC systems and building construction later. So sort of continuing our perspective matters. For myself here in Indiana, this is not unique to Indiana. Series of colonialist approaches to problems. We define and understand those problems. See, fun out here is what is the right way to understand. Again, that has come up multiple times in the last hour. What it is that we do. We have failure. We can't accept that failure. Again, we're talking about justice. We're talking about people in what identity of individuals, their capabilities. That's what we're with that knowledge. That's where so some stat, which we might start off by well-tamed problem. We know how to control, but it's much complicated, complex than that, and how we work with what we're doing and understanding, interacting with and the basic everyone should have. We have to support one another. Summarize it that way. this whole task, and in such a way with such problems that we're talking about, wicked problems, is not a simple task, but it's shy away from. One of the things require of us, and I don't think this is new, but I think saying it is important, is that we don't solve these problems and walk away. I want to say that it's done. These problems and the solutions that we create are continuously being recrafted. Experiences of the people involved, the social relationships that are involved. And I think that design is, or at least the nature of design as it was taught to me, when we think about creating a single outcome and being done, reached an endpoint. I don't point in solving. Thank you. I appreciate you taking a few minutes to listen to me this morning, and questions or was silence. I've always been comfortable with it. So either way it works.
Finally, for your to ask first of all in the round questions, of course, in absentia, Julia.
Oh, whatever is discussed.
Ben has put up his hand up. Just unmute yourself. This is a very small round. Okay.
Bryan, thank you so much. That was really very thought-provoking for me. I'm interested in the kind of between the kind of sort of rationalities in and the rationalities which you wanted to prompt you to say a bit more on that. So things that that conversation is that it from kind of direct clashes about content into discussions of like for better word, the different rationalities of justice, direct arguments over that's what justice is. I just wonder if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. When you describe it as process, we're talking about, and specifically with the case Sen and Nussbaum, or they didn't. I said I was going to talk a little bit about the, but process. It's about recognizing and understanding rather than definition of justice. I think this is something that is continuation. Justice is specifically. I don't think that problem solving that justice is. At the same time, I don't think that all designers address justice, right? I think that that's all of things that are allowed in process. Even in, I teach world where we're very intimate scale. And for my students, understanding justice is a challenge. Working primarily with undergraduates, lots of things are a challenge for them. Started, but even in the professionals I interact with, justice is not the topic of what they're dealing with. They're dealing with problems they're dealing with are wicked. And so it's about process, because it's about to think. It's about pausing to understand. It's about seeing the complex way. And effect, how are these rationalities or logics distinct? I think I don't know. I'm not asked about specifically how in a different way, how we fellow human is different than how we respond to right the ways that our brain usually. So I don't know that I provided a nice answer to your question, but I agree with you. It's process. The type of justice that we're talking about is not a finite definition of justice, and so it is inherent to continue, right? It's not there's not a set decision or solution point.
Add something here, because you're using the very traditional problem of the original wiki function, and I feel that about the nature and potential ways, a very clear distinction. For myself, I still, for convenience sake, I use the word wicked. I really hesitate about problem. Problem immediately implies that there's a solution, and what is solutions? Saying solving wicked problem, especially when I talk to students, addressing challenges, maybe. As soon as you kind of frame of a problem, then yes, maybe we're talking not really about there should be one. This is really dangerous and a constant and ongoing process. Then what is it that we're doing? We are constantly engaging with it, and we're trying our best to constantly find whatever is best given our limited perspective, and so on. So I feel if we take this very black and white apparatus and about maybe which vocabulary, what we actually want to do with it, then would really, really help to get our message across.
I think that, or your perspective on the idea of problem solution, and that solution does imply an endpoint, right? It does imply, I guess, I think of it in terms of a point of optimism within the logic of justice, that we can reach this, or we will reach this, right? Tomorrow, that this, the ideal state is to be able to reach that. And even with problems, the optimism is a possibility. That ideal solution. Actually think that in my brain, I need that optimism. able to deal with the complexity, all the different possibilities, the very real failing multiple times. When I'm speaking of solution, optimistic forward, and
I think this is super interesting. That is maybe implicit doing for yourself, but it's not translated in the vocabulary. I feel while you're this idea that we are keeping something in a potentially this want to reach, but we are pragmatic. It's the that on a way to something that we actually matter. What matters really is the we have in order to get there. Suspending a goal in virtual in mind status. I think this is something that designers do all the time. So for example, yes, you kind of artificially, because in bread and butter design, you have to make a lot of decisions to consider, but sometimes a light switch is a design problem in itself. And so even if you may think, okay, in the back, one day I want to, but I can't now. Kind of suspended for us, even though we may provide an answer. And I think we need to be very careful in our vocabulary and how, because this kind of quite, this is that doesn't do it justice. Really good answer to this. I'm trying to explore a new way. Would really be useful.
I feel very sympathetic that about hope. I think our students keep the for possible moves. Very much agree with that. There's maybe a difference between talking about the correct solution and a solution or my solution. Hesitancy and that reservation about that can quickly become when we teach. Yeah, I feel that. Point out or ask from distinguishing between right and wrong to just and unjust, really making life easy.
No.
Maybe there is a potential here to tie in something else. Rittel wrote the role of the expert that you mentioned about the light switch, rated without having to worry your pretty little sources come from and what communities might be. All of that having that has something working under it, which was resolved somewhere, sometime. A lot of ethical baggage in that.
Uh-huh.
And I've just taught a course with my students. We had this kept coming back, and that's lights here across the border in Hong Kong. They are those traffic lights that make beeping sound for visually. And there are a lot of really dense neighborhoods, probably tens or thousands of people who to listen to this and that's a really good example that we discussed about that dilemma of an urgent minority of visually impaired people, large population with a more quiet, and how to negotiate that. And that's also used. Yeah, it negotiation. Me like the cuts out the negotiation many times. The fact that some planning bureau has decided that the I might be very much in principle, but I haven't affects my attitude towards that with the situation. If someone had asked me at some point, I like the beeping, I say, yeah, I'm very much in favor to make sure that visually impaired people know that they are welcome. That neighborhood that I want to live in, consequences might be the same. Tolerance towards the noise would be completely different because of negotiation. That I think that's how I read what you said about negotiation. It goes back to what Rittel, the part that the expert contributes in that system.
I analogy that you're talking about, and I think that yes, it part of that. I also think that it's essential that designers specifically, I will say this, I won't speak for everybody, we have to be willing to give up, you know, that the expert isn't right. We can't on a specific issue able to be over in that negotiation. There are, you know, we may have a solution or a proposed solution that the community other solutions, right? That's our end goal is still addressing the problem. Our end goal is still justice, but there. I like that example. To answer the question in the chat, I know here in the United States that yes, our crossing buttons do have on them.
I've seen it.
But you don't beeps every time you push them.
Okay, of course, but yeah.
Oh,
I would like to draw your attention to Ben.
yes.
He's too shy to say anything.
Yeah, it's not interrupting is important for me. Maybe add discussion. So I think directions that one gets from wicked problems is towards the participant. And then as I only went over, but I think, you know, and sometimes, you know, it has health, but also things it has, you know, it's participate and so it has its own. And I think there's a kind of power ethical questions, positivist, coming from epistemological position, one tends to a constructivist ethical position. I'm constructive. So the idea is what it is. I'm not really kind of hope for I don't dismiss a kind of good or justice. Interesting and tricky to figure out kinds of negotiations that, because there are lots of things that we negotiate in a really just right, and there's lots of someone might be able to tell us about, but there's things that, like, of myself having negotiated really unjust, and like you know, lots of things bring its own injustices. I think now are really just, and we're negotiating, you know, we're gonna, you know, soon. So I kind of think that the negotiation is also like it's central, but it's important that it's not the from what is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, that as part of the capabilities approach, no way their capabilities, what's just for them, that should never be allowed. Everyone has abilities. People, of course, will vary to some aspect of what existence on the planet is inherent. And I think that, and I have not of Sen's work to be able to. I think he writes what he does. I think he acknowledges that injustice it away. Doesn't. Right. So yeah, I agree with you that we have to be careful in that negotiation. It can come at are these from very different ethical standpoints, or we can end up with conflicts that would inherently and concur.